I'm really excited to introduce our fourth virtual event in the At the Heart of the Matter series. We've been at this now for a few months, and this series has become a key way for us here at the Foundation to continue hearing from community members during the pandemic. This series does feature our president and CEO of the Colorado Health Foundation, Karen McNeil-Miller, who is hosting these regular conversations with local leaders to help lift up how your lives and communities are being affected, and to allow us together to explore the roots of inequity and consider what it might take to create a new and more equitable normal as we work to bring health further into reach. Today's conversation, as I think we all know, is focused on hearing from Coloradans who are, of course, more than just the faces of the frontline. They're really the embodiment of how our society is keeping on right now throughout such a tough time. So together with Karen, the panel is going to be exploring things that we know many of you as attendees have expressed a desire to understand more, including getting some insight into how to better advocate for and support our frontline workers, especially those in the workforce who are people of color, along with understanding how frontline workers have experienced the pandemic and the increased racial unrest that has been highlighted by all sorts of events throughout the year. I did get a little sneak peek of our panel before we started, and I think y'all are really going to enjoy this discussion today. So a few final housekeeping items, and then we'll move. A recording of this conversation, this conversation is being recorded, I should say. And we will be sharing an archive of that recording along with a short evaluation survey to you all tomorrow, and look for that in your email inboxes. We really do value your thoughts and feedback, so please make sure you share those with us in the survey. We do have hundreds of folks, about 160 actually, on the call with us right now. So we have muted audio to minimize background noise. And rather than host a specific Q&A period, we're actually encouraging your questions throughout the course of the event. So again, go ahead and type questions into the chat box. We'll do our best to answer them. Make sure that you are selecting both panelists and attendees in the chat box function when you want to send us something. And do also please share, if you're having any technical difficulties, that information with us through the chat. And lastly, if you just joined us in the last couple minutes and would like to use the closed captioning or Spanish interpretation feature, please check the chat box for that information, or chat us and we'll make sure you get that information. And now it is my pleasure to introduce Tara Reinders, who is a local nurse, dancer, artistic director, and founder of The Clinic. And Tara is going to be sharing a very special interactive performance to kick us off. So Tara, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Taryn. Hello, my name is Tara Reinders. I'm ask everyone to close their eyes and take a deep breath in and out. And a deep breath in and out. I'd like you to think of one thing you have lost during COVID. I think we have lost many things. What is one thing you'd like to focus on that you have lost? And I'd like you to hold it in one of your hands. And then I'd like you to think of something that you have gained or received during COVID. And I'd like you to hold it in your opposite hand. And take a deep breath in and out. And take both of your hands and place them on your chest. Deep breath in and out. You can drop your hands and open your eyes. And if you would share for this performance that I'll be doing, I'm hoping that you can help me by sharing in the chat what you have lost and what you have gained. And it could just be one word each I'll be turning them into gestures. So I understand, I wish I could see you all and you could help me create the gestures, but I will, since I can, I'm going to be creating gestures for your words. And I know that's, I feel honored to be able to do that. So if you are okay with me doing that, if you could please put in one word for something you have lost and one word for something you have gained during COVID. And then I'll be able to get started. So I see, okay, I'm gonna go ahead and stand up here. So physical community, hugs, touch, joy, I think of just joy, and music, time, I think of time passing and coming back, the time that we've lost with loved ones, joy, hugs, gain new appreciation for my partner, gained innovation, lost seeing friends, lost seeing the ones we love. So we have hugs, touch, things we have lost, time. We have gained appreciation for one another, for our partners, better understanding of what family means. Lost my children. I think of joy when I do this, and I also think of childhood and just the beauty that they hold in their eyes and their faces, and the sadness that we can't see their faces sometimes anymore. Gain new perspective on family needs, lost a job. So I'm going to go with, we have hugs. Things that we have lost are hugs and touch. And we have lost time, our precious time that we have with the ones that we love, the ones we can't see, our grandparents, those who don't live in our immediate homes. We've lost this time with them. Being able to see, gaining that sight, being able to see the ones that we love. We've gained appreciation, we've gained time as well. Okay, great. So I think I have a few. Let me gained gratitude, physical contact, gained time. So there's also this like new perspectives. This, as I was saying earlier, that what we have lost and what we have gained has garnered this new perspective of something that we could have never had before. Not to say that it is better than having what we lost, but that there's a new perspective that's growing and shifting. Okay, hugs. We also lost trust. For me, this is mine. I've lost trust in those that I have, that were supposed to take care of us in ways that I maybe expected them to and they didn't. So there's trust, hugs, touch, sight. Okay, I think I have as many as I can remember. So I'm going to go ahead and bring these gestures into a dance. And again, thank you so much for sharing what you've lost and what you've gained. I know that it's dear to my heart, and I'm sure it's dear to yours as well. So thank you for trusting me with that. I'm going to go ahead and share my sound. And I'm going to create a dance for us. And this is to honor all of the frontline workers, honor what we have lost, and honor what we have gained.
I was something, wish I was fast, I wish I knew just what I asked, wishing thought, don't tell the truth, and you just keep on on, tell me what to do. It's always been there. You always knew. It's just a matter of time. The time you feel you lose.
Tara, thank you so much. You come back on camera, please. That was wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for allowing me to share.
You know, I so appreciate the activity because I spent too much time thinking about what I've lost and not enough time about what I've gained. And so it was good to make me do that reflection. And I so totally enjoyed reading other people's ideas around what they gained. And if you're able to see the chat right now, you can just see all of the wonderful comments and offers of gratitude to you for that. So thank you. I will say to those of you who have gained better eating habits, I am so jealous because I have gone completely the other way. So let me ask all the other panelists to join us now on screen. So for all the attendees, I'm Karen McNeil-Miller. I have the joy and privilege of being the CEO of the Colorado Health Foundation. And I have the joy and privilege of having the conversation today with these wonderful frontline workers, the people for whom many of them don't have the option to work from home or socially distanced for their entire lives. So I appreciate it so much. I'm going to introduce the panelists to you. And as I introduce you, just wave your hand so people know who you are. Now, in what you read before in the kind of the advertisement for this conversation, you saw that we had a small business owner, Valerie Beltran, who is going to join us. Turns out Valerie is ill today and not going to be able to join us. And I hope we've got other small business owners on the call. And if so, would love for you to type in your perspectives and we'll try to share some of those. But able to join us today, certainly you've already met Tara, and give her a moment to catch her breath back. We've got Sammy Blaine, who's the lead preschool teacher at the YMCA of Pueblo. Yolanda Dandridge, who's the lead counselor for GALS in Denver, and GALS is Girls Athletic Leadership School. Esteban Hernandez, who's a reporter for the Denverite. Cuica Montoya, who's the Safe Outdoor Space Manager for Colorado Village Collaborative. So welcome to all of you, and thank you so much for taking the time out of your workday to be with us. So I want to start, COVID has affected all of us. Now we're 7 months, going on 8 months in. Not much of an end in sight. I don't see the silver lining quite yet. It's affected all of us, but we want to hear, how has it impacted your life and how are you doing? So who'd like to start?
I'll go ahead and start.
Thank you, Cuica.
Yes. So, I mean, COVID has, I ended up being laid off from a position I had been working on, but it also allowed for this other opportunity to take shape in my life to support the folks who sleep outside, who have no access to sanitation and shelter during a pandemic. So while it was something that felt, very scary for me, ended up turning into a new way to serve vulnerable populations. So, I mean, I'm not going to say I'm grateful for it, but I'm also, it opened up another opportunity for me to serve in a way that kind of aligns with my purpose.
So how are you holding up?
Good. Good, other than, just the constant struggle of really trying to get these established and these safe spaces established and set up in the city of Denver has been very challenging. But other than that, I feel like I'm doing okay.
We'll come back later and talk about some of your work. And just to let everyone know, I put in the chat, Yolanda let us know earlier that she was having some Wi-Fi stability issues. So she dropped off and she'll just call back in when she can. Sammy, how has COVID affected your life and how are you doing?
I'm doing good, but it has definitely affected my life and the kids I teach, everything. I went from having a classroom of 26 kids to sometimes just one kid came that day. Spent most of our days outside where they could be kids and just play. Because when we were inside, they had to be separated. I was cleaning. It was completely different. We stopped the alphabet in Q instead of Z this year, so it was extremely different. And the kids kind of didn't know how to take it, so it was helpful that the parents were also very explain everything that's going on. But with little 3-year-olds, it was kind of hard to explain to them how this huge thing is happening in the world and affecting everything.
Thank you. Welcome back, Yolanda. Esteban, how about you?
Hi, thanks for having me. I'm okay. My job is pretty exhausting. It really feels like I'm going from one disaster to another. Sometimes it's just, I've been covering the pandemic and then covering, the protest against police brutality and racism. And then last week, the wildfires. So my job has been very hectic. It's been busy, but busy is good for me. And I feel fortunate to be able to continue to do this, especially during a time where there's other journalists that have been, laid off, that have been furloughed. I feel thankful that I can still do my job, and I work for an employer who takes my my mental health seriously. And I've been able to sort of address that with, with my editor and just some of my coworkers. So it's been, at the same time, living through not just through the pandemic and detailing this movement now, this national movement for for Black Lives Matter and police accountability. I mean, I think it's important for us as journalists to make sure that we're speaking to people and asking them what they're going through. So I'm usually the one asking the question you just asked me. So it's funny to get somebody to ask me that. So yeah, I'm doing okay, and trying not to stress about next Tuesday. So.
We won't know Tuesday night anyway, so don't need to stress about it.
Right.
Yolanda, how about you?
Yes, hi, thanks again. Thank you for asking. That's a far in between question that comes from me as a mental health worker. But I want to say I've been using the word decent, and that's given me room to be able to rest and then also be proactive in the work that I need to do, and also tend to myself. We're working with the schools, so just the unknowns are constantly pouring, and we have to keep prepping and shifting and just transforming at every minute, or may I say this is like every day pretty much, to support students, their families, staff, as well as what we need as a student body, well, a educational body. So yeah, decent is my word.
I haven't heard anyone use that one when I asked the question, so that's a new one. And Tara.
Hi, thank you for asking. I think I'm feeling really sad, and I think I'm sad and I'm anxious, and I'm feeling for nurses who were feeling burnt out and experiencing grief before COVID, and then COVID hit, and so I feel like we still don't even have a name for what it is that we're experiencing now. So yeah, I think mostly just sad.
So Sammy started talking about it a little bit. So how has work changed since COVID? What's different about how you've been doing your work since March than before March? Sammy, go ahead and continue to talk about the kids.
Yeah, it's changed so much. We used to be super hands-on, get nasty, get all in the science experiments are my favorite thing, and obviously we couldn't do that. So we spent most of our days playing outside, or I did a lot of story time. We read probably 15 to 20 books a day. The kids weren't really allowed to play in the same center, or they could only play in one while I was cleaning up the rest of the center from the other times they were playing. So it went from a full-on structured day of learning to just kind of whatever we could fit in that day.
Yeah, and particularly if you're working with 3-year-olds.
Yeah.
And because every question either starts or ends with why.
Yes. Yeah.
With COVID, we don't have an answer.
No.
Mm-mm. Why can't I touch that? Why can't I sit with him? Why can't I?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So I'm sure that's been really hard.
Yeah.
Esteban, how's your work changed?
Sorry, Karen, you just made me realize that I'm like a 3-year-old because a lot of my questions also. I mean, it was very weird at first. I mean, and it was really hard to. I got to work from home, but it was really bizarre to because I don't like working from home, and that was something I was kind of like almost terrified of admitting to my editor, but we made it work for a little bit, but I didn't actually go out into like the field until about like early May. That was the first time I got out to do an interview in person, and even that was like, it felt a little intimidating at first to be like, okay, I'm gonna go out there. Like it was basically the only time I was going out that didn't involve me getting groceries or food. Um, I ended up going to a neighborhood in Denver called Montbello. And if you're not from Denver, Montbello is a pretty working class neighborhood here in the city. It's predominantly Black and Latino. And I spoke to this man and about their experience dealing with the hospital. This man was undocumented. He didn't have insurance, and it ended up sort of like highlighting one person's really kind of bad experience with the hospital. They thought they hadn't been treated as well as some of the other patients, and it was important for me to be there, and I'm glad I was able to do it. But it definitely took a little bit of me to finally feel comfortable enough to be able to do that. And again, I was fortunate that my supervisors weren't forcing me to be there. They were like, whenever you're comfortable, and I was able to do that. So it's since then I go out a little more often. I feel a lot more comfortable going up to do interviews in person with all the proper precautions. So I just got really used to speaking to people over the phone, and then sometimes I actually did do some Zoom interviews, but it was mostly by phone. So it was weird. It was weird, and it was hard at first. But now at this point, I've hit a really decent stride in the way that my workflow happens every day. So.
Thank you. Now, Kwika, you changed jobs during COVID. So, and you went really to direct hands-on with one of the most vulnerable populations. So how's that been? And particularly now, talk about how that work's going to change now with winter coming as well.
Yeah, I mean, this project has taken many shapes and many different directions just in the short time that I've been a part of it, and really trying to adjust for the changing landscape of how we provide services and resources to folks who don't typically have access to that, and really, creating a space where it's welcoming still. So it's one of those very difficult, kind of balances is that, yes, we have to take that, public health lens and create a project that has, PPE and wellness screenings and participation from the, residents, but also still not making it feel like it's an overwhelming place to be, and really still providing that equitable access to those resources and those services. My journey to this point, it was obviously worrisome, getting laid off after you think that you're not going to get laid off. And, I kind of have to take this step back that, my path so far and where my journey has been and where it's taken me, I really trusted that, like, as I was packing out my desk and collecting my last check, I ended up getting a message on LinkedIn from the Colorado Village Collaborative. So I knew at that moment that this was where I was supposed to be. And it's, being that it's such a huge, the housing crisis, the crisis in homelessness, racism, COVID impacting, people of color at a higher, greater rate than folks. And then the intersections of all of it. This is where my passion lies, is, being the underdog and kind of coming out and, you know, making a new life for myself, that I continually advocate for those that are on their own journey as well. So I actually ended up finding my happy place at the center of a global health crisis, and really, you know, speaking truth to the, you know, over the unsheltered population. This is the folks that don't access the current shelter system, have no other alternatives. And, you know, over half of those, like 53%, are people of color. And so that's just a staggering number compared to the actual overall population here in Colorado. So being out there and on that, like talking to folks who are currently living in encampments and listening and really trying to hear where they're at and designing a space that would be inclusive of all of that. So.
Wow, that's great. Tara, I can't imagine that a nurse's life changed at all.
You know, it's been really interesting. I think the work that I do with the clinic, working with nurses to combat compassion fatigue and burnout, and in my own work as a nurse, I've seen a lot more openness to nurses wanting to care for themselves. Whereas before, I've been doing this work for the past 5 years, where it felt like that was one of our biggest stumbling blocks, was just the stigma around mental health and awareness of it. And so really bringing the arts into those spaces, play into those spaces to create awareness, and nurses responding to that and wanting to. And then I can, what you said, Esteban, about going from crisis to crisis, I think that's a lot of what we do daily as nurses. And now the crises are just getting bigger and bigger. And it's putting us in a place where we're, you know, putting out fire. That's a bad analogy, sorry. Jumping from one crisis to the next, and really we don't have the time to be mindful. We don't have the time to sit and look at our biases. And we do have the time. I don't want to say this, but because we're so tired, and because we're being applauded as heroes and angels, I think that that's a missed opportunity for us as nurses to say, wait a minute, what is my role in systemic racism at the bedside? If I'm the most trusted profession, why are Black women dying 4 times more than white women? I have to realize I have a role in that. And when you're putting out all of these different crises, there's not that time to sit. And so I'm curious, I don't know the answer, but I'm wondering how we can look at that as a healthcare community.
And you know, one of the attendees in chat was talking about her son on Medicaid now because of the economic conditions, and being Hispanic and on Medicaid feels like he gets substandard treatment. And I'm reading into that, treated differently, not just medically, but as a human. In that situation, how would you respond to that? Or what should be done about that? Let's put it that way.
Are you asking me, Karen?
Yes, I'm sorry. Yes, Tara.
Okay. I first 100% thank you for sharing that. And I think that's the first step, is listening to these stories, that these lived experiences are just as valid as the numbers that we calculate in hospitals at the end of the day, HCAP scores, all these other numbers that we use to validate our hospitals, but our lived experiences are just, if not more, valid. So listening, first off, bringing BIPOC, Black, Indigenous, people of color into positions of power in the hospital, putting them as nurses so that we have Black nurses taking care of other Black patients. So there's trust that's already built in there. We have been living and working in a white supremacist society and our hospitals are set up in this way that I can understand why there's no trust there. And so I think, to answer your question, I think we need to listen.
I want to come back and continue the conversation around this intersection of the pandemic and race. But first, let me get to Yolanda on how has your work changed during this COVID time?
Yeah, as we know, because I work in the schools, the schools just makeup is changed drastically different. And GALS in particular have a very dynamic model, which includes movement, positive focus, positive gender focus, and academic. So we have, and then in the center of that is the social, emotional, mental health, wellness. So having such a dynamic model and then going to remote, we had to figure out how do we still implement this particular model and hold our students in the way that we generally will hold them in school. And so everyone know remote is the thing. Just looking at from the mental health perspective of like, how do we still reach our students, but have to have either meet through remote or how other creative ways can we be able to reach and support and actually see what's happening with our students and with our families. So we have gone into implementing new programmings. One, as was mentioned before, like slowing things down. We're constantly reminding each other, let's slow it down so that we can really see who are the voices that we're missing. How do we, I like to say, we look at creating, reviewing, and uplifting, right? And how are we creating spaces that being on screen would still support our students in engagement, still capturing attendance and making sure that's strong, and how are they showing up? How do we make sure internet access is available? Like how creative can we get in those spaces? The reviewing of just reviewing what we have done and what is not going to work at this point, so that it is constantly having this living, breathing system that is constantly still being still reaching out for our families in such of a crisis that we're in. And then, as I said, uplifting voices that we gonna lose because we know we are remote, and really finding ways to do that. So everything has shifted. And we're seeing new challenges. We're seeing fatigue. We're seeing and experiencing, and it's not just seeing, like experiencing it as a community too, right? So how mental health can be still offered? How do our inclusion department still reach the students that need to have various approaches of learning? How do we bring I just lost the word in the word, but how do we stay engaged, and how the engagement that we will generally have in the building and our students will have in the building, how do they still have that engagement? And then how do our staff still know and feel that they're reaching their students the way that they know that they can and at their best, and not questioning what's happening? So everything about learning, everything about social, emotional, mental health, everything about contact, engagement have shifted. And GALS, no, we don't do everything right. I don't think anyone in any space is doing everything right, but the effort, the intention, noticing our impact has been extremely vigilant and slowing things down and trying to find the simplicity in what we do to make sure that we still have contact with our students.
Sammy, you said you only made it to Q on the alphabet this year, and you probably didn't have all the students there for that. So some students missed F and H and M as well. As this continues, what do you think is going to happen to that gap? How are you going to make up that gap for students who aren't getting all the instruction that you wanted to offer them in a particular year, and for them to stay developmentally on track? What do you think what it's going to take?
I've started sending homework home. So if they don't come that week, I just kind of double it up, send it to them, tell the parents they can work with it. We use an app called the Remind app, and I put little clips of me teaching on there, send it to all my parents so that if they're not even here, they can still watch me teach our little circle time. Other than that, I don't know what else, because we've lost so many of our kiddos that I'm not, and some of them they come, but they're not really here. They have other things to their little heads are thinking about. And so for me to fully get everyone's attention and everyone just learning, we're still just constantly trying to switch up things, learn new ways of how to do it, and definitely open for suggestions.
I imagine, Yolanda, do you imagine that the achievement gap is going to widen?
I will think that naturally it could, and then it could change. There's something about gratification, and we were just having a conversation with our students today around how can we, and it was spoken earlier, understand what we're losing, but then also really seeing where what we're gaining. And so with that perspective, I have hope that it can go one way or the other, but I believe by numbers, I'm sure that the gap will happen because internet service is not available to everyone. Being able to access education in a way that is decodable and digestible is not available to everyone. And developmentally, GALS is 6 through 12. That's a prime developmental stage, and how our students will be able to still have access to academic and then the needs of what's happening at home. And so naturally, of course, the gap can definitely happen. And there's this hope that maybe there's something golden in this experience that will have us, because we're all looking at equity, inclusion, and diversity, and maybe something that is non-traditional will bring the gap together. And so we'll see what the numbers come out. But reality says yes, but hope says just maybe.
I'll be Jesse Jackson here for a minute. Keep hope alive.
Yes, keep hope alive, for sure.
Let's go back and talk about this intersection of COVID and race. So we had a global pandemic. At the same time, we're having this national conversation reckoning around race and systemic and structural racism. Esteban, from your perspective of covering this more broadly, what are you seeing in the community? How would you characterize what's happening?
Well, I think personally too, one of the things that's happened is it's obvious. It's made me really more aware of a lot of inequities, and I think my job as a reporter is to bring clarity and context. So pretty early on, one of the things we did notice is that in Denver specifically, a disproportionate amount of cases of COVID-19 cases were for Latinos. So we have to step back and start asking people like, well, why is this? At the very beginning, there wasn't a lot of information. There wasn't a lot of data. So even the experts we spoke to were like, I don't know. And that was sort of the story at the very beginning. And as it progressed, you start asking more questions, you keep doing the reporting, and then you start figuring out things like, Latinos are more likely than white people to be uninsured. And does that play a role into why some of these rates are higher? Access to testing is another big thing. And I'll give you an example of that. A couple of weeks ago, I was in Montbello again, visiting a community testing site that was put together by the city of Denver. And this woman, so I was there, I was talking to people. She sort of came up to me she immediately started talking to me in Spanish. I'm bilingual, so I spoke to her in Spanish, and she was telling me how she works at a hotel. She works about 3 days. She has 3 shifts. She was told she had to go get a COVID test because I believe somebody had, she wasn't feeling well. That's what happened. She wasn't feeling well. So her boss told her, you need to go get a COVID test. And her first question was, well, where? And the boss sends her a place to go. She shows up, she gets there, nobody there speaks Spanish. So already there's a little bit of a barrier, and it's hard for her to figure out how to get this test done. She does speak a little bit of English, but as soon as she saw me, she starts talking, and she was on the verge of tears this entire time because she was so frustrated. Because now she's worried about whether she has COVID. She's worried about whether she's going to be able to work. She's worried about whether she's going to have enough money to make rent, because at that point she was already 2 months behind. So like, just talking to her was incredibly eye-opening, because I know this is happening in Pueblo, this is happening in Colorado Springs, this is happening in Boulder, in Grand Junction, Bennett, Byers, all over the state. So being able to talk to people going through that, and for them to have the trust in me that I'll be able to tell their story is really important. And I do think another sort of byproduct of this is that I think people are getting a little more comfortable just being real. Like, I mean, this is a good example. Like, you asked us how we were doing, and you got like 4 different responses. And I think that's something that's really valuable, and something that I have been noticing a little bit more and more as I go out there, is that because everyone's having a different experience, and sometimes you have to sort of stop and listen. Like, literally, that's most of my job is listening to people. And I was really thankful that she took the time to talk to me. I regret not getting her contact information to follow up on her and make sure she was okay, and that hopefully she tested negative. But yeah, that's that's an example of how the intersection between race and the pandemic is really coming into play, because this is somebody who was already struggling, and the pandemic has added just another layer of despair.
Tara, what do you see in your work, this intersection of race and COVID?
Yeah, I think I can share a personal story. And this isn't intersection with race, but with my sister who's disabled, and she had COVID because one of her caregivers gave her COVID, and they weren't wearing their masks, taking care of her, and she receives care around the clock. And so she lives in a different state. She had to go and she's been in the hospital for over a month because there was nobody who could take care of her. So the caregiver said, sorry, hands off, we're not going in there. And so now she's in the hospital for over a month, hasn't seen anyone outside of her nurses, and it's been really hard. And I think just that, and she's a white woman who's disabled, and so I can say, I'm also a white woman. I can just listen to what's happening, and I can say that I think this is 100% true. This intersection between COVID and race, and how it's hurting our BIPOC community way more than white people. The numbers are there, the lived experience is there, and that we need to do some work as healthcare providers, some anti-racism work that needs to be across the board. Everyone needs to go through that. So I feel like that's what I have to offer for that conversation.
And I think, particularly Tara, for you or for anyone, that the COVID didn't create those discriminations and that bias and that racism. COVID just happened to shine a light on it in this moment. But for the people who live it every day, it's not new, nor is it news. Quickly, you also talked about the discrimination and bias against that you see that the homeless experience. Describe some of that.
Yeah, I mean, just obviously the disproportionate representation showing that we have a huge gap and we're missing a humongous portion of people that are not given that same access to, you know, connections, the having only one option for folks to access shelter or have a safe place to stay is very limiting for people. I was on this panel last week with the Consortium for Prescription Drug Abuse, and there's a humongous spike in Black overdoses. I mean, this, you know, if we're a part of an organization that's not including race and systemic racism and these systemic issues, then that organization is continuing the problem. I mean, it has to be a topic, anti-racist training, learning how an organization fits into that or maybe perpetuates the continued systemic racism, including people with lived experience, people of color at all levels of an organization. That's when we're going to start seeing that shift. And so, you know, what I see is a result of systemic racism in, you know, the housing system, but it's also in the mental health system and substance misuse and healthcare in general. And, you know, there has to be that shift. And, you know, it's one of those things that, you know, we've got some great people doing some great work about, you know, equity and accessibility. But what comes with that is the need for that change. Realizing that when we talk about systemic racism and how it affects different parts and different sectors and different organizations, that we have to remember that it also intersects all of these other, systems like the criminal justice system, eviction courts, you know, when you run somebody's criminal background check. I mean, so it has to really address across the board. So, you know, I always urge, you know, organizations to, what work are you going to be doing to address that these systems they were created this way, you know, back in the, you know, 60s, 70s, you know, or even earlier than that. So we have to figure out how to make that shift continually.
Just a couple of comments that have been coming through the chat. Certainly people have been sharing some of their personal experience. Yolanda, one person commented, one of their favorite sayings is, hope isn't a strategy, but it's still essential for survival. And then someone has shared some specific action that they're taking in their business of closing a contract with an organization because of some obvious racist behavior. So there's lots of stories coming through. You know, people keep talking about can't wait for things to get back to normal. I'm not one that says that, because normal wasn't so great for a lot of people. Normal, it wasn't so great for a lot of the people that you work with directly on a day-to-day basis. So what do you think we should be doing now in this moment that can help make normal better for the people that you serve?
Karen, I would like to answer this question and add to the last conversation that we were having. And if we think about 1863 is in reference to slavery. So racism has been happening for over 400 plus years, right? And now we are in this space that we have a major virus that's hitting, which means it's a compact on what has already been happened. It's just an embellishment of racism. And now we get to actually see the detrimental impact racism, discrimination has on oppressed people. And And I want to make sure that I have a good stream of thought. And I have to say my heart is racing as a Black woman to be able to speak about this and to be able to say, with my authentic voice, the compound is just another thing. And depending on what neighborhood you go to, COVID is not the essential thing. It's keeping food on the table, being able to get their students to get the education that is needed, being able to keep a job over their head. Those become the essential things, and COVID is just another thing that they have to be able to weather and move through. And so I really want to understand and really depend on racism is not a new thing. And what's happening is it's today, and my experience of it is like, oh, this is something new. And COVID is just another, and I've heard it be called like two pandemics. And it's like, no, that's not two pandemics. Now we definitely have a public health crisis, which now is starting to be announced that racism is a public health crisis, but it's definitely starting to show the light and the short end of even down to how resources are going to get to and who's going to be at the bottom to receive resources, whether it's health, whether it's education, who's going to be at the bottom of receiving resources. And then to move forward to your recent question, if I haven't already spoke on it, and I'm trying to bring the question back.
What does it take to, what do we need to be doing to change normal for some folks?
Yeah, and I like to say that what's going to be our new normal. I think it's time for us to shake what we used to call normal. It's happening for us whether we want to or not, and for our social, emotional, and mental health. It's imperative that we start to actually feel what our new normal will actually be. And again, it goes back to slowing down, pausing, holding on what is so that we can't get back like our loved ones, and opportunities to care for our homes, because we have in Colorado some major fires that are happening. And so just to be able to release, which is a practice, it's a muscle that we have to be able to practice of how do we release, how do we sit with what is, how do we sit with reality, and then figure out what our new norms is, because if we can figure out what those new norms are, creativity come into play, and then we start closing those gaps when it comes to equity, inclusion, inclusivity, as well as diversity, because you're going to start seeing all the jewels that are in the people that have been oppressed. They got some ideas because they've lived a long time to contribute to society to be able to be where we are today. And so again, it's like taking breath, pause, and resting in the newness that's coming through.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Kwika, what should we be doing for our homeless?
Yolanda, I love your voice. Use it, and it's just been an honor to be on this panel with all of you. We have to get away from what is normal going to look like. What was normal was unacceptable, and we have to just distance ourselves from normal. We have to have continued conversations of how do we address these huge systemic inequities that affects Black, Indigenous, people of color at a much greater rate, healthcare, housing, education. I mean, all of these systems that have, policies and procedures in place that disproportionately affect people of color. And we have to have these conversations, and we have to be open to envisioning something totally brand new. We don't want to go back to whatever that normal was. We have to envision what a new way of doing things has to be. And I really, I'll continue to stress that we have to talk about race and equity and inclusion and diversity. And, I loved what Yolanda said about how people that have been oppressed have lived a long time. Their values, their contributions are going to be key in rebuilding what that new looks like. And absolutely, yeah.
Anyone else want to offer on that? Esteban.
Sure. Yeah, the thing about, I think that question really fascinates me, what the new normal is like, and all that discussion, because I think we're going to be writing and exploring that for years to come. But one thing that I will say, that one of the things that I noticed as a reporter was that you did see a lot of, you saw some changes that were directly linked to the George Floyd demonstrations, the protests this summer in Denver, and I'll give you examples. I mean, I can think about the police accountability bill that the state legislature passed here. I can think about some of the different changes that the Aurora Police Department made, the Denver Police Department made, directly responding to some of these demonstrations, and some of the behavior of their officers during the demonstrations. And then in Denver, Denver changed the name of a neighborhood that used to be named after a former mayor who was a member of the Ku Klux Klan. And that was work, going back to Yolanda's point, that was work that people have been talking about that for years. Like, we need to change this name. This is not an okay thing for people of color who live here. And it's especially Black people. They spoke up and they said, we wanted this change. And last year there was a vote and it was rejected. And I covered that pretty closely. And then you fast forward to this summer and you have all these demonstrations, and within a couple of weeks there's suddenly a change of heart for the people in that neighborhood. And next thing you know, there's a process that's begun to change the name. And on August 1st, they announced the new name. Now it used to be called Stapleton. Now it's called Central Park. And those are all things that are directly linked to actions and voices of people who wanted to have their voices heard. I mean, they demonstrated. They were shouting. They were yelling. They were yelling G-rated things and R-rated things sometimes. They wanted to have their voices heard, and these examples that I'm giving you, like it really worked. So I'm really curious if moving forward, if this is going to be something that will continue. If there are state lawmakers or even local council people here in the city and county of Denver who will pause and listen to the people who are marching, on Lincoln and on Colfax, and really pay attention to some of the things that they're asking for. So it was very important for me to be there, and that's a good example of how much my job changed, because I couldn't cover that from my apartment, on my desk. Like, I needed to be there. I needed to talk to people. I needed to hear why they were there, what they wanted changed, and what was their best idea for moving forward.
Sure.
Yeah, thank you, Esteban. I echo everybody's voice in this, and I also want to say that the new normal, I think, involves supporting what's already been going on, supporting the small businesses that have been on the grounds doing this work for years, finding out who those people are, financially supporting them, volunteering time. And the Colorado Center for Nursing Excellence is a great resource for nurses, and they're holding examining racism in the profession of nursing. And So people are doing this work, people are examining, and to support that work that's already happening and to slow down. And for me as a white woman to remember this is lifelong work, that there's not a quick fix to this. I can't check this off my list. We're going to be doing this work forever. Not to say that we don't go all the way in, but just to remember, I love, Yolanda, what you're saying about slowing down. I feel like that's so important, the listening, slowing down.
I think what we've seen throughout this is that communities of color have always been resilient communities and face barrier after barrier after barrier on a day-to-day basis. And so for many, like Yolanda said, it's like COVID is just COVID, okay, it's just another Tuesday. Welcome to our world. And so they have continued to show that resilience, and in many ways better than, and been more resilient than many of us who are middle class and cozy and comfortable. So it's a testament to the resilience of those communities. We're going to run out of time soon, but I want to make sure I get this question in. Now, there are lots of opinions about what should be done during this COVID. Stay at home, safer at home, open up. What advice would you give your mayor, wherever you live? What advice would you give your mayor? And what advice would you offer the governor of Colorado about keeping us all safe, particularly those of you on the front line? All right, I'm gonna pick somebody. All right, there you go, Tara.
Again, speaking from the perspective of from nursing perspective, I think you need to bring a nurse to the table whenever you make decisions about how we're going to be affected. You need to have a frontline nurse at the table every time. You need people of color, Black women, Black men at the table whenever you're making any decisions that are going to affect our lives.
Yes, that's powerful. I just want to piggyback off of what Tara suggested is that we have to have those folks, the folks that are most impacted by decisions at the table when making those decisions. I think it's, you know, we have to start looking at this lived experience as a very, very qualified, unique experience to bring forward at the table, and that people that live it know best. And if it's affecting them, they deserve to have that input. So I really think that, you know, having a lived experience board, you know, to hold people of power accountable to these decisions that affect their lives on a daily basis.
And Kwika and Tara, what I hear you both saying is that that people with the lived experience have their own expertise, their own kind of expertise that is just as valid and just as valuable as the science or the academic expert. Yolanda.
Yeah, I would champion that with cultural capital. Like the lived experience is that cultural capital that the community has. I would like to also say I'm not the one that's sitting there making those hard decisions. And I can say just sitting at the table with leadership at GALS, those are hard, they're hard decisions to have to make, and knowing that as much as your heart wants to be able to make everybody happen, you still gotta find what is that greater responsibility is. And I will lean into language. Paying attention to what you're saying. I know we are practicing at GAL not using the word social distance, but physical distance, because what we say definitely from top to bottom up, our head and our body and mind and body informs each other. And when we say certain words, then it starts to compute in all kinds of ways in our bodies. It reminds us on cellular level of what ancestral information we have, historical information that we have that lives in our bodies. So language is so important. So changing social distance to physical distance will say that we can still be engaged, but we're being responsible for each other now and not walking unconsciously with each other anymore. We are not what this country was built on as bodies, as commodity. Now your body is just as important as my body when we're moving together. So just really being conscious of the words that we're using when we do speak.
And one of the attendees also made the comment that it's physical distancing, but still we need the social connecting. Sammy, what would your advice be?
Kind of also the same as theirs, also just kind of listening to everyone and understanding their perspectives of why they think we should do these things. Like Yolanda said, it's a very hard decision and I would not love to be that sole person that makes it. But I would also want to just sit and make sure that I'm getting everyone's perspective before just making this decision and thinking that you're making the right one when it could affect all of us in a failure.
Sammy and Yolanda, how do you respond to parents who want to know, should I send my kid to school? Should I send my kid to preschool? How do you respond to them?
I tell them it's definitely up to them. We do our very best, and I'm very OCD about cleaning anyway, so I'm like, we keep everything super clean. We keep it very, but I'm also telling them that we're not going to teach them. We're not going to show them how everything is working as well. So they're fully allowed to have their child wear a mask if they want to come in, because we do all day as well. But we don't have to sit there and force them to do it. If they want to take it off, they fully can. But really, it's just up to them and how they feel about if they're ready or not.
Yeah.
Rhonda, what do you say?
Unfortunately, school is remote for us right now. However, we do have parents that are from one spectrum to the next in reference to them coming in and the desire and the need to come in. But from our counseling and wellness department, we touch bases with these families and provide comfort in the best way that we can. Parts of it is normalizing as well as listening and absorbing what they are experiencing and trying to become creative in how we can support and what resources does the school have to be able to support? How can we still have connection and keeping hope and teaching resilience to our families? Yeah.
Esteban, did I ask you yet what your advice would be?
No, but I'll keep it brief. I will always advocate for transparency and accountability from our public officials. And I would encourage them to continue making themselves, accessible to journalists and the people they serve. I think they have been doing that, and I hope they keep doing that. We're pretty much getting like an update a week at this point. And it's important for us to be able to have access to, all that public information to make sure that we can add context and make sure we are able to answer questions from people that we get all the time about what the city is doing and, why they're making decisions the way that they are. So.
Thank you. Well, before I make some concluding remarks, let me just again thank you all for the gift of your time and experience and wisdom to this conversation. Thank you so much. And what I'll say to the attendees as we close, we've had lots in chat around the need to listen, the need for high quality healthcare available to everyone. And we've had lots and comments around racism. And I recall earlier on in the conversation, someone posted that, you know, when we were having the conversation about the young Hispanic man on Medicaid, someone posted that she worked for Medicaid and would like to understand what that means and what that was like. I will give you just a brief example from my own life. Both my children are adopted. And so when our second child came to us, he was on Medicaid for the time it took us for the adoption to be final, because he was still technically a ward of the state. So I would literally call the pediatrician. This actually happened to me twice. I'd call the pediatrician. Hello, this is Karen McNeil-Miller. Need to make an appointment for my daughter, Lindsay. Oh, yes, Dr. McNeil-Miller. What day works for you? What can work for your calendar? So we spend 3 minutes finding the right time on my calendar that I can bring my daughter in. So then I want to make the appointment for William. Same call, and then make the appointment for William. Okay, I'll put you down for Tuesday at 4:30. Well, no, wait, Tuesday at 4:30 doesn't work for me. Well, we only see Medicaid patients from 1 to 4, from 1 to 5 on Tuesdays. And I'm thinking, all right, I have maximum flexibility in my calendar. And I can't make that work. So what about people who don't have that flexibility? I can take off to go to the doctor and not lose any pay. For other people, that's losing pay. So that was just an example of what it looks like how that system, I don't know if it was discriminating, but it was certainly a feeling of less than. And I will also tell you, the funny part is, once the adoption was final and we were able to put William on my employer's insurance, it took me 6 months to get off the Medicaid roll. I kept calling and saying I needed to get off. They're like, you want to get off? People don't get off. Like, yeah, I don't need it. Please take me off. They couldn't send me I kept asking for a form that was never sent. It took me getting my congressman's office involved to get my son off Medicaid. So that's a process issue I'll just share with anyone that has any control over that. But again, I want to thank you all those of you who are still on the call, for listening. I think in this COVID time, we have changed who we think of and see as our heroes and sheroes, and that it's not some athlete, it's not some actor, but it's your next door neighbor. It's the person standing in front of you in the grocery store, the people who literally go to work every day and in death-defying conditions, not just to support their families, but to support all of our families in the work that they do. So I just, again, thank you all so much for what you've done. I thank all of you who joined us for this conversation, and wish everyone a wonderful rest of the week. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.